Hi everybody, welcome back to English 221. This is for our class for Wednesday, the 16th of February, where I wanted to finish up with performance with the Midsummer Night's Dream for this class. As you know, we've been watching performance from Shakespeare's Globe Theater, and I unfortunately was not able to find that performance in its entirety online for free. I was, however, able to find another performance that we could watch the tail end of, and it happens to be another esteemed performance. If I can't keep you in London, I can bring you to the next best thing, which happens to be, in my opinion, New York City and Central Park. So you might have heard of the Summer Shakespeare in the Park series that goes on every summer. This was a production, actually an older production that was done in the 1980s, but again, I was able to find it in its entirety. Now, you don't have to see it in its entirety. You can see in the link below, the first section, performance, I've included the link to the Midsummer Night's Dream Central Park performance, and I suggest that you begin viewing at minute 25:25, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if any of you believe in the significance of numbers, but it struck me that that would be an interesting place to begin. And if nothing else, it will give us continuity with what we saw with Shakespeare on stage in London. So you're at the point where basically we are going to have some resolution where Puck is going to be removing the magical spell from the individual's eyes so that we can have what would appear to be a happy ending. Though I've often wondered about this, the happy ending in quotation marks. I mean, the love juice is removed from Lysander's eyes, so he returns to loving Hermia. And because none of the lovers are objecting at this particular point, then we've got King Theseus who decides to let the lovers remain in the couplings they want to remain in. So the only one who is unhappy, so to speak, is Aegeus. Now, the love juice remains on Demetrius's eyes, so he remains loving Helena. And I don't know necessarily if that's the happiest of endings. We do know that it's a restoration of order because prior to the play itself, this was a couple, Demetrius and Helena. So one might say that he has a certain level of responsibility to maintain that coupling. But of course, we know that at the start of the play, he's changed his mind, illustrating how love is fickle, and he's decided that he loves Hermia instead. But what we're going to get at the ending of the play is Demetrius loving Helena. Of course, Helena loves Demetrius. We're going to get a Lysander loving Hermia, and of course, Hermia loves Lysander. So again, the only one who is distraught by this series of couplings happens to be Hermia's father, which I think is kind of an interesting commentary on gender, that the female daughter defies her father and does so successfully. But there's nothing clear-cut or easy in Shakespeare if you're in the midst of beginning to write a paper about the strong female in A Midsummer Night's Dream, because the love juice is removed from Titania's eyes, Fairy Titania, who realizes that she was in love with an ass. However, she's lost the changeling boy. Basically, Oberon is in power and control, even though she defied him at the beginning of the play. So again, we see some ways that Shakespeare shows complexity, and perhaps that's the more realistic element of Shakespeare, is that complexity exists in human society, so we shouldn't necessarily have a clear-cut statement about anything in any of the Shakespearean plays if they are going to accurately mirror what happens in reality. The donkey spell is removed from Bottom, so now he's a human. Of course, he will continue to act like an ass. And one of the interesting things that we'll talk about in terms of the ass is that it was considered to be one of the most well-endowed creatures in the animal kingdom. There's a lot of sexual subtext, which you probably were able to gather with the Shakespeare on Globe production, particularly between Bottom and Titania. Then King Theseus makes the declaration that all of the couples can remain and that they want some entertainment before his nuptial hour. Remember, Theseus and Hippolyta. Theseus has conquered Hippolyta in war. She's not particularly happy about that. This is a power struggle that's going on between them. But one assumes that there is a happy resolution happy, quote unquote, by the ending of the play, and that she's accepted this, and that ultimately this would be the status quo for relationships, that affection would be something that would be developed not before marriage, but during and after marriage. And one assumes, because this is a comedy, that all of these couplings will be happy couplings in the future. The play in theory could end there, but we've got an entire act to go, Act 5. And this is when Bottom and his cohorts perform Pyramus and Thisbe. It's no mistake that it happens to be a play about love, because A Midsummer Night's Dream was about love. In this instance, we get a play about tragic love, which is what A Midsummer Night's Dream could have been, particularly in Act 3 when the insults are flying, that these lovers could have come to blows and actually killed one another. But of course, we know we need to have a resolution. No death in comedy. That said, Pyramus and Thisbe might seem somewhat familiar to you if you are familiar with Romeo and Juliet. However, Pyramus and Thisbe is a comical take, because Bottom and his friends are not very skilled in terms of playwriting or acting. They remind me very much of an elementary school production. And that's, I think, one of the elements that's interesting about that fifth act. It's an opportunity for Shakespeare to perhaps try to mimic what his competition is doing. And through his mimicking, we can see that his competition isn't doing very well at all. And we'll see that in Pyramus and Thisbe, as well as we will also see a reflection of the theme of love and how love can lead to all kinds of complications and difficulties. Shakespeare is ultimately a show person, so if he has an opportunity to make some commentary, for instance, an opportunity to flatter the queen, we saw this in the sonnets. We will see this in Act 5 as well. And usually that's read as the conversation that goes on between King Theseus and Queen Hippolyta, when they talk about how they are very generous with their subjects, even if their subjects show a certain level of anxiety and are unable to greet them properly. They still understand that that's no sign of disrespect. And in fact, that's an even greater sign of respect, because they're so nervous in their presence. That's usually viewed as a compliment towards Queen Elizabeth, who would likely be viewing this play, and that she should see parallels with herself, that she also is a very noble and generous and gracious ruler, just like Theseus and Hippolyta are. And then at the very ending of the play, probably one of Shakespeare's most famous speeches, this is Puck's goodbye to the audience, where Puck, he serves many roles, as we'll talk about next class, but one role that he can be seen as serving in is a kind of Shakespeare figure, controlling and manipulating the action. And that final scene isn't just necessarily Puck saying goodbye to the audience and apologizing. It could be as well read as Shakespeare saying goodbye to his audience and apologizing. So we'll see by the ending of this particular performance, different ways that we can go about acting out Shakespeare. Obviously, our focus is on the text itself, but as I think you've realized, Shakespeare's plays are meant to be performed, and it brings a whole new level of understanding by watching that. So I thought that could be today's attendance question, which would be due on Friday, the 18th at 8 a.m., since you would have seen two different productions, one being Shakespeare's Globe and the other being Shakespeare in Central Park. Out of those two, which did you prefer and why? And I understand that you saw neither production in its entirety, but hopefully you saw enough of both. And if it turns out that you wanted to see more of Shakespeare in Central Park, you can see it in its entirety, in that we are watching just the second half, but the first half is also included on Vimeo. You just have to do a search for it if you'd like. But that's the link that I'm directing you to get to Shakespeare in the Park. I also wanted to talk about the next class. Next class should be Monday, the 21st, but that happens to be President's Day, so we will not be meeting. I will post something for the 21st indicating that we don't have class. This would be a wonderful opportunity for you to first finish reading A Midsummer Night's Dream, if you haven't already done so. More importantly, to move along with Much Ado About Nothing. And Much Ado About Nothing is going to be our second Shakespearean commentary. While A Midsummer Night's Dream was set in a world of fantasy, Much Ado About Nothing will be set in a world of reality, but we will see many of the same themes about the difficulties associated with love and all of the mix-ups associated with love. So I will also talk about performance when we get to Much Ado About Nothing, so that you'll have a bit of time to also read that particular play. Our second journal, remember your first was on the sonnets. The second will be on Midsummer. That won't be due until the 28th, Monday, which would allow us to have yet one more class to talk about some of the major themes and issues in the drama before you actually have to hand in a journal. And of course, you can utilize things like class discussions and our discussion board responses, as well as your own thoughts and your own observations. So what you've got left is approximately 45-50 minutes of production to watch. So I will leave you with watching Shakespeare in the Park and the ending of A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'll be curious to hear which performance you preferred and why. I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. And we will continue on next week. Not on Monday, but on Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.